So without further delay, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Hannah Kirby, who is a Senior Policy Advisor working on Industrial Energy Policy at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Today she will give an overview of the Government's Industrial Decarbonisation Strategy. Hannah.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm part of the Industrial Decarbonisation Strategy team at BEIS. And as Sam said, I'm going to give an overview of our recently published Industrial Decarbonisation Strategy. The strategy is the world's first industrial decarbonisation strategy, and our aim with this publication was to set out how industry can decarbonise in line with net zero, but without offshoring emissions to outside of the UK. We published on the 17th of March, and we're really happy with the media response to the strategy, in particular from key stakeholders like the CCC, who were complimentary of the level of ambition that we set out in this document. So just as a bit of background, what do we mean by industry? So our strategy covers all of the manufacturing sector, so processes used to make iron, steel, glass, paper, but also kind of less energy intensive manufacturing as well. It also covers oil refineries, mining, quarrying, coke production and industrial buildings. So industry is spread across all of the UK as demonstrated on this slide. There are some kind of major clusters of energy intensive industry, particularly around the north of England, in Scotland and in Wales. But as I said, this strategy really covers all of industry. So that's inclusive of smaller SMEs and dispersed sites, which are really sporadically spread across the whole of the UK. This is an example of what the industrial decarbonisation strategy looks like. So this is the publication that is accessible on gov.uk, and if you want to look it up. So there is the key strategy document, which is made up of three parts really. The first is kind of setting out the principles for industrial decarbonisation and the kind of government policies and demand side policies that we expect to drive industrial decarbonisation. The second part is around the technologies and setting out kind of what are the key technologies that we think can abate emissions from industry. And the final section is really about kind of the broader picture and some of the political economic impacts of industrial decarbonisation. So what are the opportunities for growth, for levelling up across the UK, and how do we think the government can kind of realise some of those benefits? We also published 4 annexes alongside this main document, 2 of which are high-level delivery plans, summarising the actions set out in the strategy, and one that looks a bit more in-depth at how we will decarbonise industrial clusters across the UK. We also included a summary of all UK industrial decarbonisation policy and a 4th pathways technical annex, which sets out a lot of the detail on some of the new modelling that we did to inform the strategy. So in terms of some of the new evidence and key themes set out in the strategy, they are highlighted on this slide here. In terms of evidence, we set out some new expectations for levels of industrial emission reductions, and particularly by 2035 and by 2050. We also included a number of case studies from business that were informed by working closely with trade associations, some examples of how certain sectors are already thinking about decarbonising. And then we also set out a policy framework for the next 10 years, so some initial key actions, but alongside a kind of longer term framework that puts some policy actions and options for government over the longer term. And we also included a discussion on how to transform industrial regions, supporting businesses across the UK, and also where government will work with both regional and devolved governments to support local transitions, for example, helping workers transition from high carbon to low carbon industrial jobs. Here I've included our indicative roadmap to net zero UK industry, And on particular, this focuses on some of those immediate actions that I just spoke about. So these green lines here show kind of definite policy actions that we're going to be taking throughout the 2020s that will help determine the route for decarbonisation for industrial businesses out to 2050. The orange represents some of the changes that we hope to see as a result of our policy action. So in terms of next steps, we're currently drafting a call for evidence for low carbon industrial products. We are also launching and soon to be launching the next phases of the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund. And there are another other actions on there as well. And in terms of changes, we hope to see two low carbon capture clusters in the 2030s, with the first net zero cluster in 2040. And this slide really demonstrates the longer term policy framework for industry. So as I said, there are some key actions that we see government taking over the next few years, but there's also a lot of uncertainty about the most appropriate policy route and the most appropriate government action for the longer term. So we've set out this framework, which gives options between a number of different policies, but is broadly based around three ideas. The first of those being kind of direct incentives for businesses. So, for example, carbon pricing or setting product standards or direct funding that we already have available, and that is there to support industry to decarbonise. Another key pillar of this policy framework is carbon leakage mitigation mechanisms that we think government really has a role to provide to kind of prevent that offshoring of industrial businesses outside of the UK. But our approach to carbon leakage mitigation might be something that adapts over time. So you can see some of the options here. And then finally, we think that there's a wider package of support that will be necessary to help industry to decarbonise, such as with the skills transition. A bit of detail on some of the analysis that we've done to inform the strategy. So we developed alongside Element Energy and the CCC a new pathways model that kind of gives us some indicative pathways in terms of the technologies and levels of abatement out to 2050. There are a number of different possible pathways. We've chose two to include in the strategy, and that's one with national networks, and that's kind of describing a world in which low carbon infrastructure for technologies like CCUS and low carbon hydrogen is available across the whole of the UK to all businesses, so regardless of where they are located. And the second scenario is one in which those technologies and that infrastructure is limited to those industrial clusters that I showed earlier. These are both net zero compliant pathways. Where infrastructure is limited to clusters, we see higher electrification because dispersed sites and those that aren't necessarily within clusters will have to rely more on electrification if they don't have access to the level of infrastructure that clusters might have. You can see more detail about this pathways and modelling in the technical annex if you're interested. And that modelling really informed the technology strategy that we set out in the documents. We've taken a similar approach with this as we did with the kind of policy framework that I showed you earlier, and that there are certain low regret actions that we think need to be taken in the 2020s to enable us to be at a level to choose between different technologies later on in the 2030s and 2040s. So here we've set out some of those low regrets actions in terms of deploying CCUS, fuel switching to low carbon alternatives, and also ramping up kind of energy and resource efficiency. So this slide is taken from chapter 8 in the strategy, which is called Levelling Up. And that really discusses how government can work alongside local and regional partners, and both businesses and government organisations, to make sure that local areas can realise some of the opportunities from decarbonisation that are demonstrated here on this slide. In particular, we worked alongside the devolved administrations to develop this chapter, having included case studies from the different devolved nations that reflect some of the individual challenges faced by industry across the UK. And we have set out a clear commitment to continue to work alongside various different stakeholders to ensure that we're really addressing some of the UK-wide challenges to industrial decarbonisation, but also with the aim of making sure that the wider opportunities are realised for those local areas where industry is currently located. And so now we're kind of going through a period of developing an implementation plan for the strategy. As I mentioned earlier, we've got a high-level kind of delivery plan in Annex 1, and that really sets out the key actions that will be taken by government over the next 12 months. But our team and BEIS are really focusing on the longer-term delivery plan, so developing some of the publications that we discussed in the strategy, as well as some of the policies, and we will be kind of making further announcements off the back of this publication throughout the year. We're also continuing to engage with businesses across the UK to kind of gain further stakeholder views and input as we design further industrial decarbonisation policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah, for your overview of the industrial decarbonisation strategy that gave us great insight into the future direction of government policy and associated roadmaps.